this is Heather Hoffman, and I have a fun stacked farm animal card, kind of a rustic vintage style, to share with you today. It's using an older Unity stamp set called Simply Home, full of great vintage, just kind of Americana farm images, lots of folk art, just fun stamp images. So I've already laid out on my stamp block all my images that I'm going to be stacking up, starting from largest to smallest, of course. Now, if you look closely at the sheep, I used the line grids on my stamp block to line up the bottom of the sheep's feet, so I know where to line it up on the cow. I had a really hard time doing this in the video because I couldn't get my head right directly over. So you might notice it's stamped just a little bit higher than I wanted. I lined it up so that the back feet would stamp right on the top of the cow, and the front feet would kind of hide underneath, again using the lines on my clear block. So once I have them all stamped, I'm going to die cut that, and I'm going to pull out the other one I stamped before where I could look directly down and see better where I had it lined up as well. Again, in the video, I just didn't want to shove the back of my head in there where you couldn't see. So, and I've decided to pair it up with some fun papers from Cartabella's Country Kitchen 6x6 paper pad. I'm going to start by adding some distress ink around the outside of that panel just to kind of help the colors blend. That pattern paper I chose kind of has a little more off-white, vintagey colored images, and so the plain white of my cardstock was just a little bit too bright to go with it. So I'm starting off with antique linen, and I'm going around the edges just kind of adding some in, and I like to pull some scrap paper out when I'm doing distress inking so I don't get my work surface dirty, unless you have a nonstick mat, and then you don't have to worry about it because it's easy to clean up. So I went around with the antique linen. Then around the very, very edges, I'm going to come in a little bit with vintage photo. A lot of times when I'm using distress ink, I like to use two different colors. It just adds a little more depth. So I'll do the lighter one first, and then just add the darker one just along the very edge. So it kind of just distresses that piece a little more so it fits the feeling of my pattern paper. So I've pulled two pieces out, and I've already trimmed them down to one just slightly larger than my front panel, and then the other one a little bit bigger still. And I'm going to offset them and put them on a craft card base. And as I laid them on, that pink just felt like it didn't quite pop enough on the craft. So I want to add a fine little narrow line of white matting around the outside of it. So what I found is the easiest for me to do on this is to have my white paper or whatever I'm matting with a little bit bigger than the piece I want to mat it behind. And then I attach it just lining up two sides. It's a lot easier for me to keep track of two sides than trying to line up with all four sides when it's such a thin line. And then I use my paper trimmer just to trim off the excess and match and line up those other areas. See how that pink now just kind of pops off of that craft paper a little bit better. Just that little tiny, tiny line of white. I'm going to use a teensy tiny paper clip and then a little bit of jute string to tie around that just to complete the vintage feel and add a fun little embellishment up in that corner. It felt a little empty and plain and like it needed something more. And just whenever I add twine and bow, I always try and cut my piece of string or ribbon or whatever I'm using larger than I need to. It's a lot easier to tie a bow and trim the extra off than to try and have it the perfect length. And you waste a little tiny bit, but to me it's worth it. You can try and trim it perfectly and just line it up as you're tying it, but I like that adjustability of being able to get it exactly where I want it. When I'm adhering pattern paper layers together like this, I usually only put the tape kind of towards the center of my image a little more. I don't really try and hit the outside edges quite so much. Part of that's because it allows that paper around the corners of it just to float up a little bit more and adds a little bit more dimension. And I can curl those edges up later if I want to increase the dimension even more. There you go. Thanks so much for stopping by. Have a great day.